Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Kaufman, Education Coordinator with Arkansas Farm Bureau. And today we have Jeff Jackson with the Arkansas Department of Health here with us to talk about things we need to keep in mind when trying to plan our county fair activities. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, no problem. My name is Jeff Jackson. I'm a retail food supervisor for the Arkansas Department of Health. I am glad to be here today. My dad retired as an agent for Farm Bureau, and so Farm Bureau is near and dear to my heart. Agriculture is near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad to be here with you today.
Yep. Thank you. So first off, are there any guidelines or any recommendations that fairs should keep in mind at this point to manage their attendance? And I know we've got fairs of all different sizes, so do y'all have anything that people should keep in mind?
Yeah, the fairs will need to follow the directives for large outdoor and indoor venues because a lot of fairs have both. Both of those directives are similar. The capacity should be reduced to 2/3. Masks are required for indoor facilities at all times, and for outdoor facilities, they're required anytime that social distancing cannot be maintained.
Okay.
So that's the first thing that they need to do. But because fairs have different activities, each activity may have to have a separate capacity. So if they have a rodeo, the rodeo will have its own capacity versus the overall fair. So they'll need to kind of think about how to box those activities together to make it work.
Okay. And I just kind of talked to some of the people that I work with in county fairs, and another thing that they wanted to know was how do they manage livestock barns? What's kind of some ideas or recommendations that y'all might have on those?
Sure. For livestock barns, generally there's not a large crowd of spectators. It's mainly contestants or competitors and their families. So social distancing will have to be maintained through that. You can do that by adjusting your class sizes to where you can maintain social distancing in the ring. It's not so much an issue when you're leading around in a circle, but it would be when you're lined up to be judged on while they're standing still and things like that. Also need to keep in mind when you're stalling, if the kids or the contestants are going to be in the stall areas with their cattle, then you probably are going to need to skip some stalls to maintain that 6 feet separation between the competitors. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is at wash racks, grooming stanchions, and things like that, we need to try to use staggered shifts of those to keep from overcrowding those areas and not maintaining that physical distance.
Okay. What about exhibit buildings? Do you have any ideas on those?
Yeah, since exhibit buildings are indoor events, they're going to have a little bit different requirements. So face coverings are a must inside those buildings. They have to be worn at all times. They need to try to figure out how to make traffic flow through those buildings to where people are maintaining social distancing as they're coming through. Think about things like one entrance and one exit so that there's no cross traffic indoors and things like that.
Okay. Lots of fairs, they are definitely community events. So there will be groups sometimes that are invited to come or that choose to come on their own. Are there any ideas for bringing groups in on ways to do that safely?
Yeah, try to avoid mass transportation. So when people are in small spaces like a bus or a van, there's a lot greater risk for COVID transmission in those types of situations. So encourage individuals to travel either together or independently or together as a family group or a group that's lives together in the same household. The other thing to think about for groups is uh, senior citizens are especially vulnerable to COVID-19, and they have a lot worse symptoms a lot of times if they do catch it. So uh, it's especially important to make sure that the directives are followed if senior citizens are coming in those groups. I know a lot of county fairs have senior day or a time when just seniors can come, and so those are things to keep in mind, that if at any point it's most critical to make sure that we're following the directives while the seniors are there.
What about carnivals? Are there any rules on carnivals crossing state lines and stuff, things that they have to do as opposed to other years?
No, not at this point. As of June 15th, we removed all restrictions for travelers coming from out of state, but I would encourage county fairs to make sure that they're screening the carnival folks and checking their temperature, asking them those questionnaires, whether they've had contact with a known positive within the last 14 days, whether they're running fever or any of the other symptoms, and do that as they're coming into the event. I know sometimes that's hard because they come in the middle of the night, but do it as soon as you can to try to catch anybody that may be symptomatic.
Okay. And I know some counties have already decided to just cancel their fair to some degree or another. Have you heard any, just what have you heard from counties on what their plans are?
There's a few counties that they've canceled basically everything except for the livestock shows, and they're just having the livestock shows. There are one county in particular has submitted a plan to have a carnival. It's a pretty small fair, and so they felt like they could do that safely. Then there's also, I've heard of a couple of counties that are doing virtual shows for things like rabbits and chickens, which would be fairly interesting. I don't know how they do that, but we'll see how that works out for them this year.
Uh-huh. Okay. So we're in phase 2 right now as a state. How could these recommendations change as our phase changes? What do you see, or people? What do people need to keep in mind, or who do they need to contact?
Well, what I would keep in mind is, right now, if you're following the outbreak, we're seeing a lot of increased cases. In fact, I think Saturday we had the greatest one-day number of new cases that we've ever had. So I would encourage fairs and anyone who's planning an event to have a contingency plan on what happens if we have to take further restrictions. So, we don't want to do that. We're hoping to stay where we're at. But, ultimately, some counties may be more risky than others based on the community spread in that county. And so, there is a possibility that we might have to ask, some activities or some events to either be canceled or postponed again. And we'll take that very, very seriously if we have to do it, because, we don't want to have to make that decision because we know it's hard on fair boards, it's hard on the promoters, it's hard on everybody, but there is a possibility of that. And so I want to be clear about that. The other thing that I would say is that they need to make sure that they have the staff that's available to oversee some of these directives, because ultimately the promoter of the fair or the fair board is going to be responsible for making sure that the directives are followed. And so they need to make sure that they have the staff and the ability to make sure that those are done.
Yeah. And just kind of in closing, who would be a good contact? Is that you, or what's the best contact information if a county fair board president, let's say, for example, has a question that they're trying to get answered for their board and to plan their event? Who would they go to?
Sure, they can definitely contact me. My name is Jeff Jackson. My email is jeff.jackson@arkansas.gov, or my phone number is 870-994-7364. We're also working with the Department of Agriculture to review plans for any agriculture-related events like livestock shows, and so they're primarily doing a lot of the fair reviews. Unless it has a carnival or something, then they send it back to us. But you can contact Patrick Fisk with the Department of Agriculture, and his number is 501-823-1234. 1703, and his email is patrick.fisk@arkansas.agriculture.gov.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I know whenever I was talking to people to kind of get these questions, they were really excited to find out answers, because obviously we all try to want answers, and there's a lot of unknown for everybody right now. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and address some of these concerns that people have.
Yes, sir. You know, I want the county fairs to go on. I spent the better half of my childhood sweating it out in a livestock show barn. So, you know, fairs are important, and we want them to happen. So, you know, hopefully we can get through this and have them for sure next year. And if we do have some this year, then hopefully, you know, we have a good result out of that as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. You have a good day.
You too. Bye.